All right, looks like we are live. Welcome, everyone. Hello and Happy New Year. It is that time of day, that time of year, that time of week to start live streaming again. So great to have so many of you back in the house today and just getting started here, getting all warmed up, making sure I can see all your wonderful comments as we go. Oh, is my image frozen? Oh no, not that again. Hang on for a second. Ah, the infamous frozen camera. Let me see if I can reconnect it here. If not, we may have to go without it. All right, camera's back. Looks good. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Great to have, again, so many of you coming in the room. Sorry about the brief technical issue there with the camera, but it looks like we're back up and running. I can see me moving over there, so it looks good. Let me just make sure I got one more window up and we'll start with today's content. So we're going to be doing some Camera Raw today, something that I actually talk about quite a bit, but I don't talk about it in terms of Camera Raw necessarily in Photoshop and even Adobe Bridge. So we'll be taking a look at how that all works today. So thanks for being here, and let's go ahead and dive in. I cannot seem to find this one, so we'll just have to go without it. All right, it's what I was looking for here. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, forget it. We'll go without it. All right, again, welcome everybody. Hello, 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 Gerald. Hello, Roseanne. Nadia. Is that 57? Welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and click on the Facebook folks as well so we can get their comments up. And today we're going to, again, take a look at Adobe Camera Raw. So for those of you who are new and saying, well, Camera Raw, I've heard of that, sounds like a thing for photographers, you would be right if you were thinking about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Camera Raw was absolutely developed, Camera Raw. Even if you don't do any photography, you just open up images. So then you might be asking, well, what's the advantage of working with Camera Raw? Like, what do I get if I work in Camera Raw as opposed to the way I always work, say in Photoshop or other image editors? Well, the advantage of Camera Raw has been and still is that it's non-destructive. In other words, you can make adjustments to your image that are visibly there, but really the adjustments themselves are stored as metadata. So that way, if you ever want to make a change or delete the edit you made, you can. So it's never really permanently writing those changes to the file. So rather than just talk about it, why don't I go ahead and give you a quick tour? All right, so I've got Photoshop open right now. And on my desktop, I've got a folder here with this particular image is an actual Camera Raw image. As you can see from the extension, it's .nef. That is a Nikon or Nikon branded RAW file. If you shot it with a Canon, it might say CR2. If you shot it with a Sony, it may say something. It's probably going to say something else. So the different camera manufacturers will use their own extension for their own RAW files. So pay no attention to that because it's going to vary camera by camera. You'll notice that a bunch of these also are DNG. That stands for digital negative. That is also a RAW file that is non-proprietary. That's actually Adobe's long-standing proposed standard for RAW files that aren't camera manufacturer specific, aren't software specific. So if you have a DNG file, it can be created by any camera, converted from any camera's native RAW format into DNG and used in software all the way back to Photoshop 7. I don't mean there's no CS7, but all the way back to version 7 before there was even a CS, let alone a CC. So that's the advantage of DNG, is that it's backwards compatible all the way back to the beginning. And by the way, it was around Photoshop 7 when RAW first became a thing for editing on your computer. All right, so now that we know where the files come from, and we know that they'll have varying extensions, and we know that there's technically no real standard because all the camera manufacturers write their own RAW files, and DNG could be a standard, or proposed standard, but it's not globally in use by all manufacturers, then what's the advantage of doing this again? Well, again, if I double click on a RAW file, and right now it's going to open up in something else. Hang on, I want to open up in that extension. Let me set this to open in Photoshop. Sorry, folks, it was opening up in a plugin and not Photoshop. And let's do that. Okay. All right, let's try it one more time. Let's double click, and now it should open up in Photoshop. And it should actually, instead of just opening, it shows me Camera Raw first. Because Photoshop said, oh, wait, you double clicked on a RAW file, therefore you probably want to open this up in Camera Raw first so that you can do anything you want non-destructively before you go into Photoshop. So you can adjust the image to your heart's content. So you notice that this scene's very dark. It was taken at the lake at night. I see there's a streak going by that was probably a car light. So it was a long exposure, nice soft silky water, but the image still could stand some improvement. First of all, it's just too dark to begin with. Secondly, we could bring some of those details out that the camera captured from its sensor into that RAW format. And by the way, if you're just wondering what does RAW mean in general, it means that the camera did not process the image in any way. This is right from the camera sensor to the memory card into your computer. With a JPEG, when you take a picture or use your phone or whatever and you capture JPEGs, the device that you captured it with is making all kinds of decisions for you. It may have brightened it for you. It may have corrected the color for you. It may have done all kinds of things for you. And more importantly, it compressed the image. And those things are baked into the file. So they're not as easily changed. So that's the advantage of working with RAW versus JPEG. But we're really here to talk about Camera Raw. So now that I'm here in the Camera Raw dialog box, which by the way, I want you guys to know that this is a window that opens up, and you can, by all means, expand that window out. You do not have to live with that little sliver of a Camera Raw window. You can make it the full size of your display. Once you get Camera Raw open, you'll notice that it's really a pretty easy interface. Don't be, alarmed by all the buttons at the top and all the stuff over here on the side. What Camera Raw is, for the most part, are sliders. And the sliders start in the middle, and you go left or right to make decisions. So if you wanted to make an image brighter, you can drag the exposure and make the image brighter until you go too bright. It looks like we just turned on the sun at this moment, but all that detail was there in the RAW file, even though this was taken in the middle of the night. Or we can go completely dark to where we basically barely see the moon there. So there is no right or wrong. It's whatever looks best for you. So if I say, oh, that's brighter, but I want it a little brighter, I want it a little brighter, I want it a little brighter, I can just keep going until I like it. And if I ever come back and change my mind, that slider's there in the position I last left it in, and I can come back and change it. That's the advantage of doing this in Camera Raw. If you were to do the same thing in Photoshop and you didn't prepare first, like for example, make a smart object or do something that's make an extra layer or duplicate the file. If you didn't make a conscious decision to protect yourself first, then whatever you would do would be permanent. As soon as you save the file, that change is permanent to that file. So a lot of the workflows that people have used over the years, such as duplicating the layer first, saving an extra copy of the image, converting to smart objects. All of that was designed so that you could always go back and change your mind. Camera Raw starts out that way from the very beginning. There is nothing else I have to do. Whatever changes I'm making here, I can go back and change my mind. So let's say that I made it brighter like that, and I click Done. Well, nothing happens because I opened the image in Camera Raw, I made a change, and I clicked done. I didn't click open to continue working on it in Photoshop. So now if I go back to the desktop where that image is, we'll notice something. We get an extra file. We get the original raw file untouched, unaltered, nothing, no pixels were harmed in the making of this video. And then we get this new file, this XMP, this metadata file. This is what contains that exposure adjustment. If I throw this away and double click on that file again and open it back in Photoshop, let's just do it. Let's throw away the edit, basically, and double click on the file again. Yes, I'm sure. And open it back up. It's just as dark as it always was because the edit isn't in the file. It's in the metadata. Now, sometimes, depending on the file format, the metadata can be stored inside the file, like a DNG or a JPEG. There is no separate we call those sidecar files. There's no separate file, but it's still just as non-destructive. You don't get a convenient file to just throw away, but you could reset the image back to its original without, or getting rid of all of the things that you've done to it. So for example, if I were to adjust these sliders, make it brighter, increase the shadows, maybe make it more vibrant so we get a bluer sky, so forth and so on, and I hold down my Option key or Alt key, you notice that there's a reset, or maybe you don't because the window's too long. Hang on. See if I can pull that window up so you can see it. There we go. You notice that there's a reset when I hold down Option instead of Cancel. So if I hit reset, that resets everything back to the way it was. So whether you have a separate sidecar file that you can toss if you ever need to, or the metadata is being stored inside the file, DNGs, JPEGs, so forth and so on, you still are working in a non-destructive workflow. All right, so for example, what if I don't know what sliders to try? I know exposure, that makes it brighter or darker, but what if I don't know cool Adobe Sensei powered auto? And if you click auto, that looks at the image and tries to guess what it should be. You're not going to always agree with the guess. That's okay. But you have the ability to use that as a starting point to adjust a bunch of sliders for you, and then you can go tweak what you don't like. So for example, if I click auto, filter and a radial filter to make adjustments to individual parts of an image. So for example, if I click on the adjustment brush, you'll notice that it zeroed out everything and it put the exposure up by like one stop. Let's pull the exposure back down a little bit. And let's grab my brush now. I'm going to take my stylus here and I'm just going to brush down here. And I notice everywhere I brush, it gets brighter. So if I brush down here and brush in this area, everything gets brighter in that area. But it only got brighter by almost half a stop, 0.45. Well, now that I made the brush adjustment, I can crank up anything. I can make it brighter still. I can make that ground like a spotlight's on it. I can also say, oh, I didn't mean to go into water. Let me hold down my Option key or Alt key and erase that part over there. So the brush toggles plus or minus depending on whether or not you're holding down your Option or Alt key. Now that adjustment is being made not just to exposure, but anything else I do. So for example, if I were to turn down saturation, then it would make it more of a black and white, just in that one spot. If I were to crank up saturation, it becomes just more saturated, just in that one spot. So even though I started with exposure for that brush adjustment, I can go in and make any slider adjustment after the fact. So if I wanted the shadows still to be brighter in that area, the shadows could still be brighter in that area or darker in that area. If I want I want to dehaze that spot a little bit, I can dehaze that spot a little bit. I can adjust any slider after the fact. So let's say that I also kind of want those trees off in the background there to be brighter as well. Well, I've already made this adjustment, and if I start brushing the trees are just going to get exactly what I've done to the foreground here. So what I can do is, you notice that in addition to add, there is new. So when I click new, that's saying I want a new point to brush with. So now I'm brushing up here in the trees with a brand new set of adjustments. I'm just going to quickly brush over here. And so now the sliders that I'm working with apply to just those trees. So if I were to say, for example, maybe not exposure so much, but maybe I want the shadows to be a lot higher, I can bring out those trees just with the shadow slider to a point, because it is dark over there. So you might start getting some artifacts or noise because you're trying to bring something out that really the camera didn't capture or doesn't exist. All right, but anyway, those adjustments are happening just to that spot. If I want to go back to adjusting this one, notice when I hover over it, it shows me what I painted. I can click on it. And now I'm making adjustments back in the foreground. So I'm making the foreground brighter or darker, or going to the trees and making the trees brighter or darker, again, based on which point or which pin I click on. And I can have as many of those adjustments as I want. So if I were to add one more new one, and I were to come down here in the water, and I'm brushing the water, it just sounds weird to say that. I'm brushing the water, but yes, I am. Come over here and brush some more water. And I would take my time and zoom in and make sure I get all the water, but just quickly. I brush the water over there, and now I can do whatever I want to the water. The water is a bit too much. Let's pull down some of the shadows there. But I could also, and the saturation is way up on the water, that's why it got so blue. But I could say, you know what, maybe I want the water to be green. I can adjust the tint, make just that pinpoint green or pink or whatever. So I can adjust that, or the temperature. I can make it bluer. I can make it unrealistically blue, like someone poured blue ink into it. But I can do whatever I want to any part of the image, all non-destructively, because of Camera Raw. And again, if I were to click done, it would simply close the Camera Raw image and go back to the desktop. Or if I click open, it will open a copy into Photoshop with those adjustments done to it. All right, it looks creepy with the foreground lighter. Then Colleen, don't light your foreground. Or go back and turn it down. All right, anyway, it's now in Photoshop. And again, now if I'm making changes here, I am being destructive to this copy, but the original is still intact. If I were to go back and say, oh, I really screwed this one up, close it and open up the original again with those edits, like Colleen doesn't like the foreground that bright. So if we were to go back and say, no, let's go back to that raw file and open it up again. And then we were to click on the adjustment brush. And then we were to go to that pinpoint, because the client, in this case, Colleen from South Africa, wants to dial down the brightness. And I agree, it was too bright, but I made a point. Now I can go and start from that starting point. So again, Camera Raw, non-destructive. Go back, make any changes you want, whenever you want. And if you do open in Photoshop, you're opening a copy of the raw file. Now, the next thing is, what if you don't? So Nadia's asking, and this is where I'm headed with it, Nadia. Nadia's asking, do I get all those options on a JPEG? And this is what I was about to say. What if I don't have raw files? Let's say I am a photographer, but let's say you're not a photographer. You don't shoot raw. You don't have a camera that produces raw files. You don't have clients to give you raw files. You just work with JPEGs or TIFFs or anything else. Well, again, back when this first came out, it only worked with raw files. But since that time, a lot has changed. Not only can it work with JPEGs or TIFFs or anything else, but there's a secret. So let's go ahead and close this one. And let's say that I wanted to do this with a JPEG. So I have some JPEGs here. And again, you know what happens if I double click on this JPEG. If I double click this JPEG, it opens it up. Where's my Camera Raw benefit? I don't get it in this case, at least not unless I know how to do it. I don't get it by default because Photoshop just opens up JPEGs. But if I were to close that JPEG, and there's a couple ways I can do this. I can go up to the File menu, I can choose Open, and I can go into where that is. It's in, I think it's in here, it's in here, it's in here, and it's in here. And those are the JPEGs. But if I were to go ahead and click on one, let's say that one, instead of opening up like I normally would as a JPEG, you would normally never even touch this stuff. If I were to go here and say, no, open it up in Camera Raw instead, then that JPEG, this one time, opens up in Camera Raw, and I get to do everything that I just showed you to it. So that's one way to do it. And again, even that's old-fashioned, because I don't have to do that anymore. But that would be a one-off, hey, I just want to open up this JPEG in Camera Raw and do these things to it in Camera Raw like I would do with a RAW file. But you don't have to do this anymore. Let me show you one more thing in case you do like that workflow. Let's say you just always want to start with Camera Raw because it's so easy. Well, you can set that as your preference. You can go into your preferences, into Camera Raw preferences, area you probably have never gone into, and you can say, hey, for file handling, every time I click on any supported file, all JPEGs, just automatically open them up in Camera Raw. So what that would mean is if I go back here and I now double click on a JPEG, let's double click on the second one, boom, it opens up in Camera Raw just like a RAW file would. So if you like that and you want that to be your default, change it one time, and then every time you double click on a file, it opens up in Camera Raw. And if you don't want to do anything, no problem, just click Open, and you're in Photoshop in the way you normally would be. So that is one way to be your default for always working in Camera Raw. Boom. That's right, Jonas, boom, I like that. And Happy New Year. So, but again, it gets better because we don't even have to do that anymore. So I'm going to set my Camera Raw preference back to the way it normally is, because I used to have it set that way, but I don't need to anymore. Let's go back and set it. Oh, this one. Let's go back and set it to just with settings. Click OK. Well, you're saying you don't have to do that anymore. Why? Because if I open up any file, like this one, it's in Photoshop, did not get to Camera Raw first. Camera Raw is a filter. It has been now for a few versions of Photoshop. And so that means any layer you can apply Camera Raw to. Any image Camera Raw can be applied to. It has nothing to do with RAW files anymore. You get that same beautiful, easy, non-destructive workflow. Now the difference is, if you use the filter, like any filter, if you don't prepare the image first, it will be destructive. Even Camera Raw's filter will be destructive if you don't do one thing first. If you don't go in first and say, convert for smart filters. If you skip this step, you can use Camera Raw, it just will be making permanent changes that you can't go back and undo. But if I say, convert for smart filters first and convert that into a smart object layer, now when I go back to filter and I go to Camera Raw filter, which there it is, it's been there now for a while, I can run Camera Raw on anything I can open in Photoshop, any layer, any image, and here it is. So I get the same sliders, the same adjustment brush, the same, like for example, so if I go to the adjustment brush and I just want to make the grass a little greener, I can change the tint to green, and I can go in and start, that's too light, but anyway, I can start making the grass green. And it's okay that it's too light. It lets me see where I'm painting. And then, of course, I can go in and say, no, because the exposure also went up. No, that's too much. Now let's drop the exposure. By the way, you can reset any slider to 0 by double clicking. Let's drop the exposure back down. Let's drop the shadows back down. And now we're just dealing with the color. So I can tune the color of that grass to anything that I want, either with temperature or tint, or even just working with, there's a color option down at the very bottom. And if I click OK now, you'll notice that there is a Camera Raw element added to that smart filter that I can always double click on to get back to, or simply turn off if I don't like those adjustments or want to turn them off temporarily. So if I say, no, I do like them, but maybe that needs to be deleted or turned down or something else needs to be done, double click. I'm right back in the Camera Raw. And if I go to my adjustment brush, I have that pen that I can say, I can click on it and I can delete it and get right back to where I was. That adjustment is now gone. Click OK again. And I haven't really done anything, but the Camera Raw is still there if I want to go back and make more changes. So, Camera Raw filter for anything that you can open in Photoshop. And it can be layer by layer. So if you were to add a new layer, just for the sake of example, I were to drag a new layer in, I'll make it small, just put it up here for now, just for the sake of example. And now I've got this new layer called Blue Sky. And I were to do the same thing, I were to, I think this one's already a smart filter. It is. I were to now just go to Filter and Camera Raw. I'm now working with just that one. So if I want to darken those clouds down, no problem, click OK. And that's been done to just that one layer. It did not affect the layer below. So you could do it on a layer by layer basis. You can make everything look exactly the way you want. Dang, this info is 4 days late. No, it's actually early for every image you're going to do from now on. All right, so anyway, turn that one off, turn that one on, go back to the other one. The other one's adjustments are still there. I can make whatever changes I want layer by layer in Camera Raw. All right, so the Camera Raw filter is amazing. I use it all the time, so that's why I don't open up JPEGs in Camera Raw anymore, because I don't have to. I have the filter. And raw files automatically open up in Camera Raw. And Mark's asking this question that I expected to come up, and he's asking, is this the same with Lightroom? Well, Lightroom's develop and editing, depending on which version of Lightroom you're talking about, is Camera Raw. So every slider, every ability is the same in Lightroom, and that's why I do it in Lightroom, because that's where my images are as a photographer. But if you're a designer, you're a graphic designer, and you don't shoot in RAW, you don't shoot images at all, then you would do it here, either in RAW, Camera Raw, or in the Camera Raw filter. That's the whole point of it. Now, one last thing, and that is the Camera Raw filter, amazing. I use it all the time. But there is something it can't do that Camera Raw can do. In other words, the filter is just a filter. It will filter whatever layer you want, just like I showed you. But Camera Raw itself has some processing capabilities that the filter does not have. So let me close these up. I'm just going to close this. I'm not going to save any changes. Two things that you would process: panoramas and HDR. And again, these are more for photographers. Graphic designers who probably won't run into this. But as a photographer, I have these 4 images. Here, I'll show you what they look like. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. They were shot like this. Click, 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 click. You know how to make a panorama? All right, well, now your phone does it just by holding it. Anyway, but if you were using a regular camera and you were shooting a panorama, you would probably have multiple images, 2 or more. So now I could select those 4 images, and again, I would do this in Lightroom. But if I weren't in Lightroom, I could still double click on all 4 images, all 4 RAW files. Oh no, what the heck is this? Okay, I don't know what that was. Skip, skip, skip. Oh, it's still opening that stupid perfectly clear. Hang on. That's what happens when you try a plugin. So let's do the same thing. I need to teach it that it should open these up in Photoshop and not the thing that took over my whole computer. All right, there we go. Okay, cool. So now, back to what I was saying. If you were to take all 4 of those images and open them up, they would all open up in Camera Raw in Photoshop. And they're on the side here, in the film strip. The filter doesn't give you a film strip. The filter can only handle 1 layer at a time. But in this film strip view, I could select all 4 of these images, and I could go to the film strip menu in the upper left corner here, and I can choose Merge to Panorama. And when I choose Merge to Panorama, it's going to do the merge. it's going to give me a preview, and I'm going to say, no, I know you cut some off. Go ahead and fill the edges in, which is a new feature. So I'm going to get the full panorama. And now I'm going to go ahead and say merge. And what that will do is create a brand new raw file. So it's creating a file that didn't exist. That's the combination of all 4 of those images. And it opens it up in RAW so I can continue editing it and continue working with it. So I have the original 4 on the left plus the brand new stitched together panorama. And now I can do whatever I want with this because this is a brand new image. So if I want to, again, it already did auto on it, but if I want to make it even brighter or more vibrant and more saturation, make it unrealistically green and blue, I can. Because again, this is all non-destructive and I can do whatever I want here. So again, same thing. If I open the image, it will open it up in Photoshop to keep working, open up a copy of it. If I say done, then it just applies those changes that are still non-destructive to the actual image. All right, yes, that is really fun. Is that Agni? Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. One more thing that you can process. I did an HDR, I did panorama. The other thing is an HDR. So what's an HDR versus a panorama? The difference is it's the same image captured with 2 or more exposures. So this is a medium, dark, light, so that I can bring out all the details that would normally get lost with a single exposure. So for example, if we go to the medium exposure, you'll notice that these stained glass windows are all blown out. If we go to the darker exposure, they're still blown out, but we can see, we can see a couple of them over here. We go to the light one, everything's blown out. So what this will do is if I select all 3, I can say merge to HDR, and it will create a composite of all 3 images, bringing over all that dynamic range from the shadows all the way to the highlights and everything in between to give me a new image. So again, merge, that will create this new image that I'm telling it to save. And now I've got this new image open that I can do anything I want with. So if I were to bring down those highlights a little bit more, there comes that stained glass. So the stained glass now is there. If I were to bring down the whites a little bit more, we can see windows and things that we normally wouldn't have seen with that one exposure. We still keep the detail in the light areas. We still keep the detail in the dark areas. And this is why photographers create HDRs. Neither one of those would be available in the Camera Raw filter, but both of those are available in Camera Raw, Lightroom, and last but not least, I said that once already, I'm sure, there's this application called Adobe Bridge. Adobe Bridge has had Camera Raw built into it also for many, many years. So if you're wondering, why would I ever use Bridge? If you wanted to process a bunch of images at the same time using Camera Raw and you weren't a Lightroom user. If you're a Lightroom user, you don't need this. If you're not a Lightroom user, you're an occasional user that processes a bunch of images, that's where Camera Raw and Bridge comes in handy. So once again, I could select multiple images here, hit Command R or Control R in Windows, take me into Camera Raw, and Camera Raw is built right into Bridge. Also, what's nice about Bridge is it can be processing a bunch of images, hundreds of images, doing things to them while you work in Photoshop. Versus if you work in Camera Raw in Photoshop, it ties up Photoshop until you're done. So that's another reason why we use programs like Lightroom and programs like Bridge to do that work for us while we're doing things in Photoshop. So for example, I could process hundreds of HDRs at the same time in Lightroom while I work in Photoshop. So that is Camera Raw. That's hopefully you understand it a little bit better now than you did 29 minutes ago. And problem when I strongly lighten the dark area, colored dots sometimes appear in this area. So someone's asking on Facebook, when they strongly lighten a darkened area, so let's say we take this one, and let's say we were to go in with the adjustment brush and we were to go in, we're going to reset the tint, we're going to reset saturation, we're going to reset dehaze, and we were to just do exposure in this really dark area right here. Well, you'll notice if we zoom in on that, it didn't really do us justice because we went too bright. And what he said is if I strongly lighten something up. So if I bring that down a little bit, then it becomes okay. If I go too far, I'm going to start getting artifacts. And what he's probably referring to with color dots is called noise. And noise is something that happens in digital photography when the sensor doesn't have enough information to render a proper image, meaning it was too dark. So unfortunately, there's not a ton you can do depending on how bad the noise is. However, just note that Camera Raw does have noise reduction. So I would try the noise reduction slider in that same area that you're brightening up way too bright because it was too dark to begin with. And see if that reduces the color noise. Also, there's noise reduction here, and there is a oh, hang on, I'm in the adjustment brush. That's why. Let me get out of the adjustment brush. There we go. Let's get out of the adjustment brush. Okay, but get out of the adjustment brush. You have the noise reduction in the adjustment brush, but you also have a detail tab, and that's the one with the little pyramids here, little triangles. The detail tab has a whole noise reduction section, including color noise reduction, those little dots you're seeing. So it will try and reduce the color noise that was introduced into the image as a result. Okay, so hopefully you got something out of all this. Working in RAW. I want you to work in RAW now. Camera Raw, that is. Whether you shoot RAW all the time, you shoot JPEGs all the time, you don't shoot anything, you process images, it is the way to go in terms of working with imagery that you want to be non-destructive. So if I, again, cancel out of this, it will do nothing to the image. But even if I had applied that horrible adjustment to it, I could always go back and delete it, undo it, change it, drag the slider the other way, because it's completely non-destructive all the time. When is it destructive? It's only destructive when you render out a copy of the image. So the original still stays intact, non-destructive. It's destructive only from the standpoint of the copy you made to actually print, share, put online, make a JPEG from, so forth and so on. All right, folks, with that said, I want to thank you for watching. There are 2 Camera Raw Terry. I don't know what that means. Thanks for watching. We will catch you on the next one. I'll be streaming tomorrow something to do with InDesign because it's InDesign Tuesday tomorrow, and we will be on the InDesign Facebook page as well as my other channels. With that said, cheers everyone. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye, everybody.